Now, before we mock you, Gohan, I just want to let you know that we love you. So lately, there have been a lot of superhero antics going on in Dragon Ball. I mean, to be fair, it's nothing that new. Both Japanese Super Sentai and more Western interpretations of these types of characters and tropes have been commonplace, a very intrinsic part of the franchise for quite some time, and have been often connected by some real-world pop culture inspirations from Toriyama and Toyotaro. As of late, what with the movie and the manga chapters that we've had, all of that stuff has become even more prevalent. And you know what? It's time for us to look through all of those examples, big and small, and rank them a little bit. And of course have some fun. We'll start with an honorary mention coming from Toriyama's pre-Dragon Ball era, Superman or Superman or Sour Man. This very obvious parody of Superman comes from Tomato Girl Detective, a Toriyama one-shot from 1979, and is later seen again in Dr. Slump. But he did appear in Dragon Ball when he was trying to intimidate General Blue, but of course, he ended up being scared into submission. Basically, he's the exact opposite of the character he is trying to parody, the ultimate coward. Kenta Kuraku is selfish and cowardly. He doesn't have that many superpowers, and he transforms by eating pickled plums in phone booths. Now you might be thinking, well, what's going on? Well, remember, this is Toriyama here. Also, he seems to be pretty insecure and tends to throw grenades at people who annoy him. Yeah, that's a thing. So yeah, not exactly the most serious character out there, as this is a very outlandish parody. But he's also not the most heroic, which is why we're giving him 2 caps out of 10. And by the way, he does have a Super Saiyan-like transformation, which of course he presents in the Dr. Slump movie, but it doesn't really make him stronger. It just looks cool. The next 2 we want to deal with are as close to each other as possible, as they both have their own 2 separate spin-off series, and also belong to the same organization. That's right, we're talking about Jarko, the one you know better, and Gia, the one that maybe a few of you know about, and for the people who do, you'll just think, oh, he just looks like Iron Man, innit? Let's start with Jarko, as we think that there is no need for an introduction at this point. Very full of himself, the slightly cowardly galactic patroller who originally went to Earth looking for a baby Goku and then ended up having some crazy adventures with Bulma's sister Tights, and the elder scientist known as Tokunoshin Omori. Later on, he becomes an ally of the Dragon Team, starting with the likes of the Golden Freezer Crisis. Also, Tights based their sci-fi protagonist on Jarko, but still, it wasn't a great success. In later sections of Super, he has this partners in crime relationship with Bulma, when they then go to Zuno to try and get an answer to a very big question, and is usually around to talk about his greatness to other characters, generally being only slightly helpful, and mostly boastful. Jarko's time to shine came in his own manga, and the Moro arc, when he genuinely showed bravery against Moro for once, wanting to go down fighting. What? Despite being absolutely terrified of the Ram Man. But it feels like this arc did the most for his character progression, as he did the most things that would be considered, well, helpful. Gia, however, comes from his own 3-chapter story, written by Toriyama, but illustrated by Masakazu Katsura, known from, amongst other things, Video Girl Ai and Zetman. It's more mature in a raunchy way than most of Toriyama's conventional work, but the character himself is rather interesting, as he is definitely more competent than Jarko. He also fights vampires in his story, which is pretty metal. Gia is that little alien who inhabits an Iron Man-like robot suit, but is also capable of taking over hosts and their entire bodies, and, as such, experiencing the world through their senses. He has a strong sense of justice and can be a little silly, but he generally tries to be good. He's slightly more competent Tick from, obviously, the series of the same name. Also, it's believed that he is the one patroller accompanying Mirrors on this panel in the Moro saga. I mean, he does exist in the Dragon Ball universe, that's why we included him on the list. Why else would we? As for the scores, Jarko got 4 caps out of 10 and Gia got 6. After all, he actually does something. We're not going to be including Mirrors here, as he's not really a superhero per se. Mirrors kind of behaves more like a secret agent rather than a superhero, but we're just going to mention him here, so you guys won't think that we forgot about our angel boy. The next one, oh man, you know him, you love him, it's Captain Chicken, known from the 28th World Martial Arts Tournament. Sadly, we don't know a lot about him, but you wouldn't forgive us if we hadn't mentioned him. Come on. He literally chickens out after seeing the famed fight between Goku and Oob go down. Him inventing a story that he's needed elsewhere, but hey, at least makes a chicken look cool. And he's actually emulating the great Mr. Satan in making excuses. Aww. We'll give him 3 caps out of 10, just because he seems nicer than Sour Man. Speaking of the champ, we're talking about the champ himself. That's right, Mr. Satan or Hercule. While he is actually a martial artist, it's undeniable that public views him as a hero after his victory over Cell. And we, as the audience, we learn about his tricks very fast. He is a fraudster, he is boastful, and incredibly cowardly. Not unlike the likes of Jarko. And his only redeeming moment is helping 16's head reach Gohan, and that then kind of changes into the Buu saga, where he's then becoming actually a true caring self that actually has a legacy to keep up, so he's kind of stuck in his own situation, and he actually manages to help out innocent Buu. He's also quite instrumental during the Spirit Bomb sequence, the first one to actually work in the main series, as we were recently reminded in the Boo Bits, of course, thanks to Totally Not Mark's review of the saga. After all those events, well, we kinda call him a hero, for different reasons than the main characters do in the show, but mind you, it's still worth mentioning. Also, in Super, he is quite helpful and supportive of the Z-Team. We also know that he genuinely cares about his extended family, and has learnt to accept the weirdness surrounding them. He also manages to enact a somewhat successful training regime with Boo, which sadly goes nowhere, of course, but it is worth noting. We'll grant him 6.5 capes, as while he did help to save the universe, he still maintains a very large fraud amongst the general populace. But still, he is one of the good guys these days. The next one is the heroic law enforcer. I love him, it's Catapesra! Many of you hate him, but we love him and his silly gimmick. It's just so cool. And granted, we don't really see him doing heroic things all that much, but still, it's gotta count for something if he was included in Team Universe 3. His whole shtick of switching between different modes feels very much like Kamen Rider, which we've not really seen much in Dragon Ball. He also has a larger-than-life personality, so he does command attention, to say the least. He also lasted surprisingly well in the arena, gave Vegeta a run for his money in a way in Super Saiyan, so we can at least give him that accomplishment and faculty. And of course, defeating Vegeta at some point and then Gamisales is nothing to be ashamed of. 5 capes out of 10, my friend. This next one works basically as a group, somewhat infamous amongst the fandom, but we do find them pretty funny. The Kamikaze Fireballs. So yeah, another trope. This time with magical girls, which would make sense because Toei is very good at making them, with some really eccentric forms. Ribrienne, Rosie, and Kakunsa are quite formidable, if not a little full of themselves. Nevertheless, they might be the strongest fighters of Universe 2, and they did cause some trouble for their opponents. They're also generally beloved in their home realm, and everyone is cheering for them to the point that Zerloin, Rabanra, and Zabuto are trying to replace them after the 3 got eliminated from the tournament. Whilst Team Universe 2 is very particular about looks and vanity, and they might come across as very vapid and simplistic, you can see that they care for their world and each other, which is very commendable. No doubt, they perform the same role that the next entry does for their universe in their home, so we have no other option but to award them with 7 capes. They don't get any more because they can be very mean, especially to poor 18 and Krillin. Don't worry, karma got the better of them. The next entry you probably guessed would be the Pride Troopers. On paper, this is the most effective group out of all the superhero teams here. You have some very big heavy hitters like Jiren, Toppo, come on, nobody calls him Top, Dispo, and Kasserole. But the lesser-known members of the Pride Troopers, such as Cocotte and Zoire, can be considered very successful. Also, in the manga, Jiren is a very good asset that they have, and he's genuinely a much better-natured being, and he actually does stuff, albeit flawed due to its trauma. We see their results, and the results are, well, arguably even better than in terms of the Dragon team, as they are more of a proactive hero team, trying to seek out evil and reacting to the threats around their universe, instead of the Dragon team which just waits for it to happen and then they go, oh yeah, we better stop that. They're the most Justice League Avengers type of group in the story, and they know what they can do with their resources, which puts them at 9 capes out of 10, as they look, well, almost overly competent. Alright, let's now get closer to our good old Universe 7 team and consider someone closer to us. Well, 4 someones, as we're talking about the Great Saiyaman Men. Obviously, number one is the original Great Saiyan Man, whom we all know and love, but seriously, who put that do-rag on him? Needless to say, his superhero antics at the beginning of the saga are very beloved, but sadly short-lived, as we don't really see that much of him after the Wrath of the Dragon situation. Then maybe a little bit of GT, and that episode when Barry Khan got possessed by Watagash. But still, it's Gohan. And you know, he did save Earth from 2 cells at one point. Both of these were a bit of a group effort, but the credit was given to him. The next member is the Great Saiyan Woman, or Great Saiyan Man 2. This one we wish we could have seen even more often, as we all know what happened to Videl after the Buu saga, and it would be very delightful for her to return to her heroic roots, because even before she met Gohan, she was trying to keep her city safe. She's got a strong sense of justice to boot. Maybe she was a little bit too controlling and bossy, but still, she did have good intentions in mind. As she is absent from the manga incarnation of the character, it's sadly unlikely to see it again, but maybe one day. And then of course we've got the 2 freshest members of the Saiyan Man family, X1 and X2, or Goten and Trunks. We've seen their little adventure quite recently, which was quite cute and tied into the superhero movie much better than they did in the original, with Chapter 97 giving a very decent payoff for all of that stuff. It was really cool to see the 2 of them trying to do good, with Trunks being the somewhat neurotic leader and Goten as more of a patient and understanding sidekick. It's something that we hope could be explored more in the future, especially with Bulma seeing for one more time, slacking on the younger generation's training is not a good idea. Honestly, during the peaceful eras, characters in Dragon Balls do tend to grow awfully complacent, which often ends up biting them in the bum sooner rather than later. As for the rating, well, taking all 4 into consideration, we kind of need to average out to a 7. Yeah, we know, an absolute shocker, right? You'd think that the Great Saiyan Man would have gotten an even higher score, but honestly, the impact of this particular moniker is really not that big. And honestly, it would be higher if these 4 characters were allowed to do more in their respective guises, but for now, 7 seems fair. The next duo, or rather trio, is an obvious one related to the previous one. It's Dr. Hedo and his 2 robot boys, Gamma 1 and 2. They have immediately become some of our favourite characters from this era. Hedo, the estranged grandson of Dr. Gero, who is more misguided than evil, and really just wants to be like his idol clean god, and he's portrayed as a rather resourceful little guy. While his 2 greatest accomplishments have an innate need to be heroic. Their character arc teaches them what it truly means to be a hero, to the point that Gamma 2 is willing to sacrifice his short life for the greater good, summarizing that his brother would be the better one to survive. It's truly touching, and much like Android 16, it does have lasting consequences too, because Gamma 2 is not going to be wished back. Also, the additional layer that they have been based on, Saiyaman X1 and 2, really adds to their connection to the group. They are relatable, and it would make sense for Gamma 1 to be integrated. They're fun to watch, they're very comic book-like gimmicks, and they've quickly won the audiences over. The superhero movie was very much their story. And even though they didn't get that much screen time, what they were given was utilized very well. So we gotta give them 8 caps. I know, yeah, we know, more than Gohan, but they didn't really get that much time. But what they were given was utilized very well. Hopefully this isn't the end for Hedo and Gamma 1. The list is almost complete, but I feel like something's missing. Alright, just kidding, it's time for the main course. The OGs, the one with their own song. Toku Sentai, Toku Sentai. You know it couldn't be a superhero discussion without these 5, or 6 if we had Bonyu. And it's funny because the arguably most well-known Super Sentai-esque group is not very heroic due to the classic Toriyama subversion tactic. They're a quite effective henchman team and the ultimate villains of the Frieza saga. Their colourful designs, flamboyant personalities, and some really interesting gimmicks made them a really beloved team. From time-stopping Goldo through Fast Berta and just absolutely brutish Raccoon. They just take their section of the story by storm. And all that because Toriyama's kid had a Super Sentai phase and he wanted to honour that. Aww. The main purpose of the Ginyu Force was because Toriyama wanted to create something, well, new. And in a way, the Ginyu Force became a blueprint for all of those other posing characters in Dragon Ball later on. So yeah, they do deserve a place on this list, and whilst they're not heroic, they do make for a pretty great team, and are definitely more internally coherent than, well, the likes of Superman or Captain Chicken. Easy 10 caps out of 10. Masako? Why are villains getting 10 capes? Well, maybe Lord Frieza paid us to put them so high, or maybe this list is not entirely that serious, so don't worry about it. That being said, we hope that we remembered most of the superheroic characters from Dragon Ball. We've excluded the likes of Goku and Vegeta because they don't really consider themselves as superheroes, and it'd be kind of boring if we did. But hey, which are your favourites?